Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. It is supposed to have been 16, 15 degrees last night. I'm not sure how bad it got. I think it was probably 19, 20. But welcome to our next edition, our current edition of Coffee and Panduce. I'm Christian Cano, and I want to thank our wonderful neighbors for joining us here this week. And once again, I want to thank everyone who's following us on our Facebook Live page, Coffee and Panduce. Also on your favorite other outlets from the YouTube channel. Those of you who are in Florida, Massachusetts, Georgia, I think we have determined as well, and of course the rest of our friends who are going to be watching this later on in all of our pages. So I do hope that you'll take time to share this feed with all of your neighbors. And so today we have some wonderful special guests. I want to welcome everyone, and today's topic is actually going to be Charlotte, systemic racism and bigotry, the impact that governmental policies have on our residential racial segregation across the nation and our backyards. That's a that's a tongue twister. So I think we're going to have a good conversation. But first, before we start, let's go ahead and introduce our neighbors that are joining with us. We'll start from my right.
My name is Tira Long. I'm a native Charlottean. I am on the Healthcare Justice NC board, and thank you, Kano, for all your work you do with Healthcare Justice NC.
Well, thank you. You know who I am. You probably need no introduction, but let's go ahead and introduce you.
I'm sure I do need an introduction. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Mark Jarrell. I have the pleasure of serving on the county commission. I represent District 4. I'm in my first term. Never ran before, and I am in my first term. And happy to be serving and happy to be here with these fine folks today.
Well, welcome. I have to say Commissioner Jarrell. I know you don't like that. I know you like to be called Mark, but it's hard. Right, it's hard to not say Commissioner. But welcome, sir, to our house and to our neighborhood.
My name is Jeff Scott, and I'm here. I'm a regular at this point. This must be my fourth or fifth.
You are.
So I'm here happily sipping tea and warming up, trying to get over the stuff that we all appear to have a little bit of at the moment. And I look forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, you've been under the weather for a while, right? Ever since you got back from your holiday trip. Wow, it's been hanging on for a while. Well, welcome. Thank you for taking time, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Appreciate it.
I'm Scott Fudd. I'm Christian's neighbor here in the Old Providence neighborhood, and originally from Spruce Pine, North Carolina, up in the hill country, where I'm glad to be in Charlotte right now because it's much warmer here than it is in Spruce Pine right now, I'm sure. But as I like to say, I'm kind of, I don't want to say the token conservative on the panel, but my views are a little more probably to the right than most of our other panelists, yet I am all about us all getting together and getting along and compromising and agreeing, which is something that seems to be a lost art form these days, and that's one of the reasons, other than the fact that Christian is wonderful.
Well, thank you.
And I love discourse.
Well, thank you. And those of y'all who have followed us for a while, you know, Fudd is one person that has really enlightened me on some issues as a progressive Democrat and as a
conservative, socially liberal in many ways, but conservative.
We've had some great conversations. Yeah. I wish we could just do a show just with a fly on the wall at the sports bar on what we talk about.
Well, I just wish that people of differing viewpoints could discuss things and be as civil to one another as you and I are. Well, that's my dream.
Yeah, well, as do we, and that's why we have this show to educate people. But before we start, let's talk about our wonderful Panduce that we have today. Once again, our Panduce is being sponsored by Katie Blah. Katie Blah, and with Blah Catering, and she's here in Charlotte. We want to thank her very much for sponsoring our Panduce. Everyone, please take a piece while I continue to introduce some things. If you are hungry,
do you have to do my caloric content on this?
It's all fat free. It's all fat free. And I do want to thank you. Please give her a call, and also she's on Facebook as well. I'll get the number for the end of the show to give her, and I apologize because I had that number mesmerized, but I do not have that at this second.
You had it mesmerized?
I'm mesmerized by our
Mesmerized,
director going,
okay.
where's her number?
Yeah.
But thank you, Katie, Miss Haiti. And last week it was her birthday, and I want to thank you very much for sponsoring our Ponduce. And so we'll start off with our traditional salute to coffee and neighbors. Salute.
Cheers. Cheers to all.
Salute. And we'll just take a couple of minutes for everyone to please share us on Facebook if you haven't already. And we're going to get right into the conversation that we want to be talking about today. But right before we do that, let's talk about buttons. You've got a button.
I have a button.
Excellent. Very quickly, tell me about the button and what the cause is.
So the cause is Healthcare Justice NC. You can find us on Facebook, look us up, or on the internet. Sign our chapter resolution. It's free. We would like Medicare for All, which is HR 676. That bill will be changing soon. It will be changing names, but we will keep you updated on how that works. Pretty much everybody in America needs health care, and a lot of people do not feel like they're adequately getting it. The group started because the doctors were angry that they were not able to treat their patients. And they knew that the resources were in the next room over, but insurance companies were not allowing them to save them, and people were dying. So they formed this group, and we do have legislature in office. Other countries do use this system. It's a single payer system, and they do not dictate how the doctors can handle care. So that's my primary cause, and again, I always thank Cano because Cano's on the legislative committee with me, and he's very active with healthcare justice, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, thank you for educating me on a lot of it as well. So I've actually wore that button. I think it was last week. So so it gets two plugs. My button is actually the group called NORML, the National Organization for the
Reform of
Marijuana Laws. I am pro medical cannabis, and this group has done a lot, especially here in North Carolina, but across the country, on ending the state prohibitions of cannabis, but also the federal prohibition of cannabis. There are 32 states, I believe, right now that have ended the prohibition in one way, whether it's medical or recreational. And we hope that we can move that needle forward here in North Carolina for those who need it from a medical perspective. But there's also people who, on the recreational side, I know there are some of them at this table who support that as well. I'm for ending the federal prohibition so that way states can make a decision what's best for their state. So that's my button. You don't have a button, Commissioner Jarrell, but do you have an issue you want to talk about very quickly?
How much time do we have again?
It's just imagine.
Tara has set the bar.
Absolutely. So I wish I could have a bunch of buttons on.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, as you know, we were at an event earlier this week with Richard Rothstein. If you have not read the book Color of Law, I would tell you to please read that book. It talks about the history and the systemic racism and how we've segregated ourselves and the intentionality behind that. And so there are a lot of great books out there, Evicted and Color of Law, but I know we'll get into that discussion, but certainly affordable housing in our community is something we have to tackle, and so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent.
So I would be wearing an ATC button if they had an ATC button, which is the Actors Theater of Charlotte. They've got
Yeah, I forgot
play
you're the
going
culture
on
guy
for
on our panel here.
They've got a play going on to mid-February on Nina Simone, 4 songs, and I recommend it. I haven't seen it yet, but the ATC does amazing work there. They're located on Queens University, and they're always looking for new people who come in and see their shows. They've been going strong for 29 years, and it's a great outfit. And many of their plays and musicals have really hit home.
Oh, excellent.
So.
And Fudd?
If I had a button and I was half genuinely talking to these guys, it would be a little steal your face because I'm a recovering deadhead. But that kind of plays
Okay,
into...
you know, our demographic is a Latinx, millennial type of individual. So
explain
what a deadhead is.
A fan of the band The Grateful Dead, which kind of leads into Christian's button that he's wearing, the normal button, which I would say that yeah, I think that's one of the issues that, and it also leads to the healthcare debate. I think that in a responsible society, if we could deal and grasp with marijuana laws and states' rights, I'm so happy that you brought that up as far as allowing the states to decide, but we could pay for a lot of health care if marijuana was decriminalized, taxed in a system sort of like the alcohol beverage control that we have in North Carolina, and take all that tax money, put it directly into the healthcare system for people who are not able to afford insurance, healthcare, etc. So,
Well, Fudd, I think you have proven our case that we're going to have a show. I think there's an event that we have in February that we're organizing. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's a Medicare for All event here in Charlotte. You have the date on that?
February 10th.
February 10th, and we'll talk about that later on. And we actually want to have a show specifically talking about the Medicare for All, especially since Senator Harris, who just announced that she's running, and at our town hall meeting, I believe it was Monday night, if I'm not mistaken, and she talked about Medicare for All. And there's already two independent, Bloomberg and the gentleman from Starbucks,
Howard Schultz,
who has said it is a terrible idea, and I was listening to them, and I could tell they do not actually know what improved Medicare for All.
That's
They're
correct.
still getting there.
and guess what? They're both billionaires.
That's all we need.
For all you AOC fans out there, they're both billionaires.
Well,
so.
and I'm one of them. All right, so let's get into the topic, and I want to thank you guys in advance for keeping everything really short. Charlotte, systemic racism and bigotry, and the reason I really wanted to talk about this issue was the event that you were on the panel on Monday night, I believe, and Mr. Rothstein's book. And it was a wonderful. If you have not read the book, I encourage you to read the book. And I think he has a lecture on YouTube that they mentioned.
Multiple.
Multiple. Look him on YouTube and listen to him speak. And it was really telling. I've known the story about. Can you kind of explain that, and then I want to get into how that still exists, if it does exist, in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Mecklenburg County.
So when you say the story of that, as far as just from a historical perspective?
Yes, because I
here?
don't think a lot of people understand that.
So
15 seconds.
15. All right, I'm done. Okay. No, so obviously we're covering 400 years of institutionalized structures that have been put in place and certain systemic barriers that have been in place. The systems are strategically designed to disenfranchise black people and other people of color. Women, you have to include in that as well. And so what Rothstein has done, which is he's put together a beautiful book that really talks about how these structures were created. He goes into what was behind the thinking and the thought process. He pulled out some really interesting facts and really said, in the early 20th century, as everyone knows, the country went through a period of Reconstruction, where we were supposed to, the second part of the 13th Amendment says that we were supposed to essentially restore rights of former slaves and fully incorporate them into the system with equitable practices. And certainly we didn't do that. We went through Jim Crow. And then moving into the 20th century, he explained how there was a period where there was integration, and then the structures became more and more intertwined, and we put in laws like the Housing Authority and other of these mechanisms that really caused us to really segregate ourselves, and how essentially where we are now is exactly how it was designed.
And I thought that was really, and there was another part of the 13th Amendment that he mentioned, but he also said that part of the 13th Amendment, and I immediately looked at my pocket and pulled it out, was that we were supposed to fix the effects of slavery as well.
And that's what I was trying to refer to.
That's right.
That was really
Yes.
trying to. I mean, it's
Which I
so
don't
much
think a lot of people
to
understood,
unravel.
understood that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack. That's why you have to read the book, and I apologize that I didn't
Oh, that's,
articulate
and I don't mean to put you on
correctly, so-
the spot
No,
to
but-
be the expert on that, but it was a very, very, it was one of the better events that I had attended. Of course, it was an overflow crowd. I was actually in the gymnasium of the church to watch it, and everyone was engaged in the conversation, and you guys did a great job on the panel as well.
Thank you.
I guess the question is, and we can go around the room, and if you don't feel comfortable answering it, that's fine. Does systemic racism and bigotry still exist in Charlotte, in the old, what do they call it, the old Northern State?
The Old North State.
Old North State.
You Texan.
Let's start with
Fudge is such a Texan. Oh my goodness, the Old North State.
Yes.
Don't make me sing the theme song. The
Please
North
don't.
Carolina
Actually,
State
you are a
song.
singer, so.
Well, I
it
am,
might
but
come
that
out.
one I'm not very familiar with. Well, I'm familiar with it, but
Sure.
I don't think I could do a good job. It's kind of like the national anthem. It's really hard to sing. But having said that, yeah, one of the things in looking at that, and as a native North Carolinian, and having grown up here, even though I didn't grow up in Charlotte, I somewhat feel like I grew up in Charlotte because I grew up in a little town in the mountains called Spruce Pine, which is about halfway between Boone and Asheville and our beautiful, lovely Blue Ridge Mountains. But when I was a kid growing up, it was really strange because that was pre-cable for all you younger people out there. We had an antenna that stuck up on a pole. So that's how we got our media information back then. But Channel 3, WBTV, the local station here in Charlotte, for some reason came in like a clarion. It was like the TV station. We picked up better coverage of that than even Asheville or some of the more local stations. But having said that, WBTV, I remember when I was growing up as a kid, and I was, and I have to say that there weren't very many people of color in there were a bunch of hillbillies, and I use that term endearingly, but we were hill people. We were where I grew up, and basically I was exposed to Charlotte through Channel 3 and WBTV, so I kind of got a feel for the history and what was going on in Charlotte. And this is dating me, and I'm showing my age, but I remember vividly back in the early 70s when Charlotte and Boston were, for lack of a better term, were the two laboratories for busing and racial integration. And
you've learned that from
watching Channel 3. And I
Okay.
remember one of the vivid images that I have burned in my mind is on the little screen behind the newscasters, they used to have this graphic, and it was a white fist and a black fist.
Sure.
Opposing one another.
Yeah.
And as a child, that just made a huge impression on me, and I was like, and it made me think to myself, and I was like, having grown up in kind of a very Christian, loving, compassionate household, I was like, why is that, and why does that have to be? Because, like I say, I had a couple of black friends when I was growing up, because there weren't very many black people, African Americans in our community, but I was dear friends with my two friends that I did have. And I was like, well, we get along just fine. What is all this stuff going on? So I do think in a sense that we have made progress, but there is still a very long way to go. But I am glad that I'll put it this way, I'm glad we're at the point that that graphic is no longer displayed on TV, but that started me thinking when I was a young kid, and it's something that stuck with me throughout my life, and I think that's been a big impression on me as far as getting along with people of different,
So as a resident of the OP, us who live in Oak Providence, and we think the whole world revolves around us over here in the OP in South Charlotte.
And it's a very diverse community.
We have a very diverse community here.
It's awesome.
In comparison to many other areas of Charlotte. Is your feeling that we still have systemic racism and bigotry?
Well, there's, in the community as a whole.
That's putting you on the spot.
In the community as a whole, and
Sure.
and in our city and our state, I think there's
Sure.
definitely.
Sure.
Because I think there are old attitudes. A large part of this, I think there are old attitudes, and old attitudes die hard. People are. I don't want to say it's a product, I think, of the environment that you grow up in, and then some people just don't. And we've had this discussion on a previous show that some people don't realize. They just don't realize because
They're doing races.
and they've been brought up in certain ways, and they don't even realize that their behavior might be, or their, even though their intent is good, their actions bespeak things that that they've just kind of been ingrained with. And I think the more we grow intellectually and educationally, that we understand that there are topics that are still sensitive that not all of us appreciate or understand. But I think we've made vast improvements, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Excellent.
And it's all just about respect for one another as a human being. And when we start looking at one another in that.
So Jeff, you want to do that in like 1/4 of the time?
I sucked all there.
That's okay. It gave me time to take a bite of the Bondusa, which is very good, by the way.
You know, I am a newcomer to Charlotte, relative newcomer, so I've only been here.
As is 95% of
yeah.
Charlotte.
That's right.
That's right, sir.
But that's really the point,
Sure.
right? It's a very cosmopolitan place. It's a very, it's a new city. It's a new southern city. It's attracting a lot of people because it's got a great job environment. And I believe, you're frowning, we'll have to go over that a little later.
That's okay.
I certainly have biases. I certainly have some implied, what they call implicit bias. And let me just tell you a quick story. And I think I told this at the Black Caucus,
Black Political Caucus
meeting. That I once had a burglar late at night, and I peeked out the back window, and they tried to come in, and they climbed up on the roof, and I called the cops. Cops came in and said, "Can you describe the person?" And I said, "Yeah, he was just so tall, long hair, and he was African American. He was a black guy." And they went up there and found him and brought him down, and he was white. And I had just, I was living in the Western Addition, San Francisco, which is where, historically, a lot of black communities had lived and thrived. The whole Fillmore area, which had been bulldozed over time, making room for all the yuppies that live there now and all the tech workers. So I've seen the city go through a lot of racial turmoil over the years. And I also lived in Oakland for a long time. But I also worked in the financial and banking world for many years, and that's a very, that's also somewhat cosmopolitan. Downtown Charlotte feels like a fairly enlightened world to me, especially compared to some of the other places where I've seen it had a lot of racial tension. At a certain point, I'd like to talk about Rothstein's thesis, which is pretty interesting. I've listened to a couple of interviews with him, so I'm familiar with his basic ideas about housing and what happened. So I find it totally pretty fascinating. But I don't know if I've really addressed your question, other than the fact that a lot of people.
It was a yes or no question.
Well, I can also tell you that when B of A moved headquarters from San Francisco to Charlotte years ago, I remember there was so much venomous spite toward North Carolina and the culture here
From the people from America
the people in the Bay
yeah.
Area, And we thought it was really all trailer park hillbillies, people like Fudd here.
I'll own that.
And so it was like, who in their right mind would ever want to live there?
Sure.
So,
Mr. Jarrell.
So there's a lot to unpack in the question, but certainly, racism is running rampant in the 21st century in America, and it's tied to a few things. So we unpack a couple of things that Fudd said. While you don't overtly see the black fist and the white fist, you see it in a lot. It's played out in our society in a lot of different ways. Right? So you see it, but if we take from when you were a child, then when Harvey Gantt, who was the first African American mayor of our city, when he decided to run for Senate, one of the most infamous commercials was Jesse Helms, the hands commercial, the white hand and the black hand, and white hand being rejected. So these, these images have been portrayed over time, and then to come to what Jeff is saying, that it contributes to the implicit bias. So we grow up with that. Those are the images that have been ingrained in our minds since we were children. As an African American man, and it's okay to say black, it's fine, okay? We can use that interchangeably, and nobody's gonna be upset, right? But so as an African American male, we understand how to navigate and maneuver through this society that has not been built for us, but we are indelibly ingrained in it. Have everything you talk about B of A.
Yeah.
You talk about all the financial institutions, all the insurance companies, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. All of that wealth, all of the wealth accumulation has been built off the backs of slaves and our ancestors. That accumulation of wealth is a direct result of that. And it's hard for us to, and I think that's why Rothstein comes in and talks about, essentially he's talking about reparations. He doesn't use the word reparations, but essentially that's what he's talking about. And because he has such a good grasp of how wealth has been accumulated and how people have been oppressed. And I think those are points that we have to deal with. Your story is not remarkable in the sense that any black person that's looking at this would be surprised. Stuff that we go through every day. Little things, and I just want to give one example, I'm sorry. So I'll give you an example of something that happens on a daily basis to black folks that a lot of people don't even think about. I'm in Walmart, I'm in the line, there's a long line, I'm just waiting. The cashier is just, this person is phenomenal. She's, hello everybody, hi, how are you? Great, blah, blah, blah. Going up, and the line is getting short, it's coming to me, and I'm kind of hyped up and revved up to, how are you? I'm waiting for the whole thing, and it's like, silence. She takes it, wasn't rude now, don't get me wrong, just wasn't rude, but the greeting for me was completely different from the people that were in front of me who didn't look like me.
The air goes out.
So the air goes out of the balloon, but then you wonder, okay, well, what happened? Like, what happened? So you wonder, did she realize what happened, right? I'm feeling crazy at this point, like, wow, this is something. And it's little things like that. And sometimes I can speak for myself on this. There are times when I'm going through our society, even as an elected official, sometimes I'm going through our society and I'm saying, give me a break today, guys. Give me one day without some foolishness, nonsense, implicit bias type stuff, right? I want to be equal, but we learn that a lot of times we have to be, our parents ingrain this in us. You have to be twice as good just to make up the difference. And that gets tiring sometimes. And that's why you had the Fannie Lou Hamer say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. Thank you. That was, thank you for, I'm glad we have that perspective here today. Do you want to take a quick tackle at how you feel that, is that still exist here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, I will. So I absolutely agree that it still exists. I do think that my generation did a better job of working on it. So I graduated from Harding High School in 1999, which was the last year that busing existed before it went back into a segregated system. Currently, there are 11 segregated schools in CMS. And when people don't hang out with different races, they don't know how to interact with them. So it's so important that we start at the school system to teach integration. And it's very sad that we're in the state that we are. And so I think that's what I offer, is being a native Charlotte and having experienced integration. And I'm not saying that my generation is perfect. There's still a lot of stuff that we have to work out. But I think I'm more open-minded than people that don't get that exposure at all.
Thank you. Well, I can tell you from my perspective as a person who grew up in Texas, or who was born in Texas at least, and has lived in several other big cities before coming home, back home to Charlotte, North Carolina, it does exist. And I agree with you, Commissioner Jarrell, that I think a lot of times it's so subtle, and some of it's not even subtle. It's I call it the bless your heart racism. It's the what I encountered when I moved here, wearing my cowboy hat in honor of my grandparents, not really understanding that is a for many people who aren't familiar with the Latinx community, especially people who've been here generations and so forth, that a lot of people here believe, or they stereotype that a person with a cowboy hat is that's kind of like a working hand culture, a Hispanic field worker or something. So when they saw me in the cowboy hat, they automatically said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Texas." No, where are you from? And I never got that anywhere else except in Charlotte and North Carolina. And then there was the bless your heart. Now, I didn't get that. I didn't understand that because I didn't grow up here until I got outside the bubble and looked at it back in again. And then I realized that it is here, and it's also in our banking. When y'all talk about the financial industry, you look at the financial industry and you go probably up the third or fourth floor, and it's all white. So it may look diverse on Trading Tryon at lunch, but the bigwigs and the CEO didn't even live in Charlotte. Has to fly home every day. So I think it is here. But the one thing that I will give Charlotte credit for is there is this progressive nature in Charlotte and in North Carolina that wants to see things change. I just don't know if they hear enough of the stories like we heard on Monday night about how wealth has been for so many people of color, specifically our black brothers and sisters, how of a disadvantage they have had over generation from wealth that was not passed on to them because they didn't have that to start off with the housing, with that kind of those kind of things. So I see that here, and I do see really good people of faith here who have been on the forefront of helping us try to change those things here in Charlotte. And they are good people. I saw wonderful, good neighbors at the event. I just don't know if we have educated people enough here on the difference between diversity and equality, because it seems like many of them want diversity, but they don't really want equality. And that's what I've seen. But that's my perception of it. So you want to say something?
Well, and I think that's something that it's like can't see the forest for the trees kind of argument. When you brought that up, and that's a wonderful point, and I hadn't really thought about it. But there is a difference between diversity and equality, and true equality. That is something that's going to have to come from in here when you accept people for who they are, not what color they are, not what gender, race, anything like that. That's going to have to come from within. Diversity is something that it's almost like a statistical thing. Mm-hmm. You can impose diversity. You can say we have these numbers. We need to meet these numbers in order to make everything fair. Mm-hmm. But in order for true change to come about, it's going to take parents educating their children that we're all human beings, mm-hmm. no matter where we come from, no matter what our worldview is, sure. that we are human beings, and it's almost like and as a conservative, and you hear a lot of talk about things like affirmative action and things that that are outwardly imposed to try and bring about this sort of equality, as it were, and there is. And a big thing, and I kind of agree with this point of view. There is an equality of outcome as opposed to an equality of, like, in other words, you should be able to, and ideally, and what we need to work for is where everyone has an equal opportunity, and not just some imposition from an outside force like government to impose that. And like I say, and I'm sounding like some sort of like I went to too many Grateful Dead concerts. I'm
That's
getting
fine.
I'm getting this spiritual vibe going on, but and I truly believe that it's going to take more than just, even though we have to have laws and legislation and like busing and segregation, because I know for a fact that friends of mine, older friends that my age, and I'm 53, and friends of mine who grew up in Charlotte and were here during the busing thing, I know a ton of my friends who are from Myers Park, which is the little neighborhood in Charlotte, and a lot of those kids went to West Charlotte, and when they did that, they made friends that they would never have made ever in their lives, and it has been lifelong influences and friends, diverse friends, people of color, and kids from Myers Park.
Well, Floyd, it's interesting you say that, and if you guys want to jump in, just raise your hand now. We had this imaginary button on our other shows. That if someone was wrong, you would beep it. I do think the salvation, or the light at the end of the tunnel that I see in Charlotte, and the reason I love this city and I love this area, is because it has grown in spite, not because of certain things that have happened. I think in spite of the things, because we have people that are bringing their cultures, bringing their life experiences from other areas. And so Charlotte has a wonderful ability to become the new capital of the South, and learning from the life experiences of people that have come here, and maybe not make some of the same mistakes, or try to minimize the mistakes at other cities that were growing. And I think one of the great things is our financial industry, or the Honeywell's moving here, and all these companies that are relocating, the people the talent and the culture. In the corporate world, we know that it's an advantage to your company to have a diverse cultural workforce and so forth, because that makes you more competitive in the corporate world. So I'm hoping that as our Chamber of Commerce, or what are your thoughts about that?
So I would respectfully push back a little bit on a couple of the premises that you laid.
Okay.
One, I think this narrative that the South is the racist bastion of the country is somewhat of a false narrative. Racism exists in every sector, corner, community of the United States of America and places around the world. The South is not an exception to that. There are places in California, when you look at the migration trends that happened earlier in the 20th century, a lot of people from the South, you look at the police officers that patrolled Los Angeles and places in California, were from the South. They implemented policies that were based on their upbringing. And so you've seen that played out over generations on the West Coast. You've seen that in places like Boston.
I just started to say, I interjected the busing thing.
Right.
When it was going on in Charlotte, it was also going on in Boston, and I think in ways Charlotte handled that better than Boston did. And people would think Boston's a northern city.
Dr. King went to Chicago one time for a march in the great neighborhoods and things of that nature, and I believe there's a quote where he says this was some of the worst racism he had witnessed.
Yeah.
So I just want to, that's the other reason why I say.
And I don't doubt you for a moment on that topic. I think you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah, and so the other piece that I would like to really speak to as well is that, Charlotte has grown in spite of, but they've grown with excluding, right? We've grown excluding and being exclusionary, and not creating equity. Just to say we went to school with white folks, okay? I mean, that's cool. I mean, that's great, because, we should have an equal education, and we know when you include particularly people that are on the upper end of the socioeconomic spectrum, it's going to get a change, right? You're going to get those changes, and you can look at what happened with West Charlotte and the changes that were implemented. But if we don't look at the other factors that go into creating equity, because when people just retreat to their respective corners at the end of the day, how does that help to the young poor Latino kid or a poor black kid when they just go back to their neighborhood and they're dealing with those other issues.
I agree, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, and we're going to skip to maybe another a little shorter subject here, because this is a very this is a very important topic.
It's heavy.
And I really appreciate the fact there are groups out there that are holding these adult conversations. We need more of these conversations. We need not just these conversations where we have to go to where we went to Monday night. We need these conversations in Valentine.
That's right.
We need Councilman Driggs to have them at his Valentine Breakfast Club. We need all city council members and county commissioners in all of their districts to have them in Mint Hill, to have them in all of these areas, because I'm kind of a half glass full kind of guy, and I truly believe that there are more good people who really want a level playing field for everyone. If we can give them but many of them don't know that history. I'm almost very embarrassed to say this. I didn't know about the history of the housing and that kind of stuff that Rothstein discussed until I watched a repeat of Blackish. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah,
they did a really good. That's a great show. If you guys go on the Hulu and watch those, they did a story on that, and I sat, and I know that's terrible that I would get my history lesson from that show, but they did a very good story, and I was like, I didn't. First of all, I never would have learned that in school, but it was a story that was not told to me as a Latinx individual. Our stories were obviously, we were discriminated, but we still, and I say this today, I use my dad as an example. My dad, when he was growing up, and when his dad grew up in a time where there were signs on doors in Texas that said no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans. And my dad, who is from his family's from Mexico originally, even though his mom was in Texas before Texas was Texas, but his dad is a naturalized citizen during the Reagan immigration reform time period. But my dad always thought, well, because in the theaters, the white people sat in the front, the Hispanics, we say Latinx now, sat behind him, and the African Americans or the blacks sat up top. My dad thought he was white because he didn't have to sit up top. So in his mind, not thinking that so our experiences, I guess, and so I was taught, I didn't understand even our own experiences and so forth. And so it's important that we educate people on what our history has been and so forth. So
yeah, it's almost generationally ingrained in us, and some people, and like to your point, Mark, the Walmart story. That's I'm like, wow, and people don't realize that. A lot of white people do not realize, they do not have that perspective of like, you don't have to deal with that every day. That's not even a thought that enters their mind.
So let me tell you what we have this joke in my family. We live out here in Oak Province in South Charlotte, and we've got this joke. If we go out to Harris Teeter, or Harris Teeter or whatever, we've got this joke that there is this. We can always tell the privileged white individuals that live out here, because they're the ones that when the cashier doesn't speak with them, it's unacceptable. So it's called, this is unacceptable. Where, as you mentioned, and even not to the level that you mentioned,
You're unacceptable.
I have learned as a Latinx person growing up and whatever, I was told you need to, when you fly a plane, dress well. When you wear a suit, they'll treat you better.
Know your role. Know your role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or we call it, my cousins used to say, you're acting too white. Well, we were taught you need to act this way so that way you are treated differently, and that's just how we were taught. And I didn't realize that, because that was kind of what we were taught.
Well, not all conventions like that, they'll
Sure.
have a racial component. I mean,
Sure.
you go in for a job interview, you're going to dress up nice. I mean, there's nothing
But what's
racist
nice?
about that. Well,
Is
You
my
know,
cowboy hat nice?
You
Well,
said there's nothing racist about that?
I don't think there's anything racist about looking nice, about saying I want to look nice. I'm a woman. I want to.
But don't you think that
dress
depends
nice,
on? Yeah.
You know, whatever
Sure.
whatever your position is, wherever you are,
Yeah.
you know, looking nice or being presentable at a certain place. Like I could have worn a tie. You wore a tie. You look very nice with that bow tie. You know, but you know.
But you know what, Jeff? I
Look in your best.
I completely understand what you said. When I ran in 2016, I was told, "Don't ever not wear a tie." I was told that
Yeah.
by a person
Right.
because they said, first of all, you look young, you look Latino,
Yeah.
which I am, but you
Yeah.
know, you look Latino.
That's why you look at
And
it.
they told me always wear
Go
a tie.
figure.
Always wear a tie because people will respect you more and so forth and so forth. And I did. And then I remember watching President Obama come to visit, and he gave a speech for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And he had his tie on, but he had his sleeves rolled up because he still. And so I remember going, I wonder if he was told the same thing. 2018, I ran against someone who never wore a tie. Ever.
Well, you
And
know,
didn't have to wear a tie. And so,
like there's
my mind was like,
there's
I wonder
dress
if he was
codes.
told the same thing.
There's
That's privilege, though.
It is
That's-
privilege.
that's-
It's like,
There's
There's
dress
privilege.
codes. You know, if you're walking around a disaster site and
Yeah.
you're the president or you're some president's representative, you're not going to be in a suit and a tie. You're going to open your collar and you're going to roll up your sleeves because that's the way the TV cameras want you to work. It's like the production values of the appearance.
But
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, but
There's nothing wrong with
they're giving him the so with President Obama
Yeah.
or with Christian, they're giving that advice based on understanding the way people process race. That's why they're giving them that advice. I believe, and that's just my opinion. It doesn't make
well, I
it
knew,
right.
I knew
But
that.
but I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
would say to your point, one of the things that I find so interesting that we think about in so you gave the example of a job interview. I think it's a fantastic example, but it also illustrates and demonstrates how we don't drill down a couple of layers to understand what that same scenario means for me or my mom, my sister, or anybody that looks like me. Because yes, how would you feel, listening audience? You're dressed nice, you're qualified for the job, and you still are at a disadvantage.
Have a strike against
Right?
you.
You
before
already.
you even-
If your name is Shaniqua versus Sharon, resumes look exactly the same. You don't even get a call back. So that I'm just saying, if we're able to drill down, and so here's the thing I want to make sure that I'm not doing. I don't want to seem like I'm the pessimist here because I'm not.
That's usually my role.
I am, yeah, but I am coming across that way,
No,
and
you're
I'm
not.
not, and I hate that I'm not because I am an optimist. I'm actually an idealist to a large extent. I'll tell you, I am a great example. I am one of the only elected officials in this city that represents a district. I might be the only one. I think I am actually. That represents a district, not at large, that does not have a majority black district as an African American. Like I don't have an all black district.
If I'm going to ask,
yeah,
just
please.
to clarify, your district encompasses what area?
That's a great question. So District 4 encompasses, it's the eastern part of Mecklenburg County. I have all of Uptown, a little bit of South End.
You get uptown?
I have Uptown. Yeah, I have Uptown. That's what a lot of
We
white
need to
people
walk
say.
in places.
Are you sure about that? No, but I have the pleasure of serving and representing all of Uptown, and then we come out east, Almall Road, Plaza Midwood, Chantilly. I come out a little bit of NODA, come out Central Avenue, Independence. So as you all know, and unfortunately people that are not from Mecklenburg County don't know, it is the most diverse district by far.
Not
even
and
close.
that's the beautiful thing about that district
Exactly.
is there's so much diversity.
There is.
So many differing and walk through Plaza Midwood one afternoon. If you're not from Charlotte, it's our quirky little, but it's awesome. It's like
Right.
Austin,
Sure.
I would
Sure.
compare it to Austin, Texas. I mean,
That's a good-
it's
you know what?
it's a great area. But you see, I think that speaks highly not only of you but of Charlotte as a whole.
Well,
that
and,
you
and, that,
represent
and that was the
district.
point that I want to make sure that I get
Yeah.
because I am so appreciative to the people of District 4 in particular that said, listen, we have choices, and they had another choice who was Caucasian, and an outstanding candidate as well. And, you know, and we were able to come across to make history in our community to say the first African American ever to represent this particular district. In a time when the images of black men aren't always the greatest that we see
And that, yeah.
within the media. And so I'm very grateful, but I also feel a great responsibility to bridge divides, to provide spaces where people can be honest, where we can say yes, they can say black, you know,
Or
Marcus
Caucasian.
or Caucasian, right? But to have these conversations and provide safe zones for people to do that, and just because it's my perspective, it doesn't make me right. I'm giving you from my life experience, but I want to hear from others as well, and we've been able to bridge those gaps.
Quick question, because we're going a little bit over right now. We started a little late, but does anyone think around the table? Let's say yes or no. Because we have one of the first African American mayor here in the city of Charlotte, female, right? We also have a very diverse city council, county commission, African American sheriff, African American chief of police, African American fire chief as well. Does anyone believe that could cause some people to say, what problem is there really a problem? Because look,
Yeah.
does that make
Yeah,
sense?
exactly.
I mean, yes or no, go across.
So absolutely, despite our integration, we still have racism.
Okay.
That's a whole nother show
Yeah.
to analyze.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I would agree with that too, because I've had conversations at our sports bar where I've talked about this, and they actually think that this city is. They've even told me this. They're like, "Oh, we're going to become like the next Detroit," you know, or you know, and that's not a positive thing because they see all of our elected officials. I'm like, you don't understand. Anyway, there are people who actually believe because those positions are look like that everything is just fine here, so to speak. Or I don't know how you.
I think your answer,
Yeah.
the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Well, if they were all libertarians, we wouldn't have a problem.
And my short answer is that I think that we're fortunate in Charlotte that even though all of the people that you discussed are not of my political point of view
Sure.
necessarily, they're all ultimately qualified and
Yeah.
very, very good people that they're the right people for the job. So I don't think
Sure.
that race or anything
Sure.
or sex matters in that situation because I have great respect for Vi Lyles and Kurt
Putney.
and
Chief
yeah,
Putney.
Chief, and yeah, and I think those people are and they have done well by our community, and I think they've done a great job thus far, and so therefore I think at least with me, politics is out the window as
Sure.
far as that one is concerned.
All right. Well, I do have the telephone number of the person who is our sponsor of our coffee and Ponduce. Heidi Bly, thank you, Bly Catering, and it is delicious. And I know we haven't had a choice to eat it because we've been in a wonderful conversation. If you like some catering and you have catering needs in your office or at an event, a quinceañera or whatever the event is, give her a call at 704-819-8689. I'm going to try this. 5-6-0-4-819-8689. Oh, good job! My high school Spanish paid off. With the little accent.
I started saying you can do it with a southern accent.
Exactly. And also, for those of you who would like to reach the fastest growing demographic in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County, and in North Carolina, and in America, the Latinx millennial demographic, please consider sponsoring our show in the future. Once again, we've been doing this show, getting ready to go big time, so you can get on early here. And if you're interested in sponsorship, please give Kali Lily's Promotions a call at 980-477-1513. or you can just email us at coffeepandulce@gmail.com. That's COFFEEPANDULCE@gmail.com. And once again, for those who haven't watched, pan dulce really just means bread, sweet bread. In many Latinx cultures, and actually a lot of cultures, we just kind of sit around the table and eat coffee and talk about these kind of issues. As long as we don't talk about the Patriots during this, we're all going to get along very well. So before we, what I'd like to do right now is I would like to talk about social media question of the week. I spend a lot of time on social media. No way. And there was a post out there that had President Trump at the door, and the lady from The Help with the pie, and it said, Mrs. Pelosi asked me to bring you the pie. So who in here has seen the movie The Help?
Oh, I've seen it.
So do you know what that meant?
I do.
Okay, do you know what that meant? Okay, all right. Obviously, not everyone has seen The Help.
I haven't seen The Help, but
Because
I do
there
know
were
I'm familiar.
people who posted, "Oh, that pie looks good. Give me some coffee." They were trying to, and I almost wanted to say, "You don't understand what that." So if you have not seen The Help, rent the movie The Help. Go to Netflix, whatever, and then that meme will you'll understand what that meme means. But I did think it was interesting that there were actually people who had not seen The Help, and they were like trying to defend Trump in that meme, going, "Well, I'll eat that pie." And I was like, "No, you don't understand the joke from that one."
Bad mojo.
Exactly. Now, since we are going to be running just a little bit over, I'd like to go ahead and jump into our constitutional quote of the week. As many of you know, we like to talk about our Constitution, which I call the American Bible. And I don't know, have we decided? Are we just gonna who's gonna read this one on the Constitution? Would you mind reading it? Which one is it, first of all?
It's 6.
6.
Amendment number 6.
In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense.
Excellent. That's our constitutional. We want to have you explain it since none of us are constitutional lawyers here. But we try to read a constitutional quote of the week because I truly believe that every household and every human being should have a copy of the Constitution. And like I said, I believe that every hotel room should have a copy of the Constitution in the drawer with the Bible and the Book of Mormons. Exactly. So that's very, very important. I like to read those. Wow, y'all! 2019 and 2020 elections are here.
we're already in election season.
Let's see. Julio Castro has declared he's running. Senator Harris.
He dropped out.
No, he hasn't. You wish
Kamala?
I think Bernie Sanders is going to be announcing. Elizabeth Warren has either announced or is announcing.
She's exploratory.
The exploratory. Wasn't Hillary like an exploratory for like a year or so? And
Hillary's still exploring. I think that Hillary is there for 2020.
There was the Ready for Hillary group that was raising money before she ran. So I'm really excited. There's going to be a really nice, diverse group of individuals. And even though I'm not a big fan of billionaires running for office, it is a democracy. If Bloomberg and the other gentlemen decide to run, I really believe if you just if democracy is having as many wonderful points of views and let's allow everyone to speak equally, as long as there's a level playing field. Now as a Democrat, I'm happy that the DNC, our Democratic Party, has set some rules about primaries and superdelegates and so forth. The Republican Party, the only one I think is President 45 is running, and I don't know.
I don't know if there's going to be a primary challenge or not, but I will say this, that I think as a political junkie,
Sure.
this 2020 election is going to be fun to sit back and grab the popcorn, get a
Well-
cold PBR and sit back and watch this because it's going to be interesting. And what I think that's just emerged over this weekend, the dynamic of Howard Schultz, who
Yeah, that's
used
his
to be
name, Schultz.
a darling of the liberals. They loved him. But now, since he's announced his candidacy as an independent, ooh, there's some hate going on.
But you know
especially
what?
in the
But
media.
I would not confuse the liberals with people who they're just they're like any campaign. I did it as well. When you find out someone else is running, you immediately try to damage the other person's brand.
Certainly.
So don't confuse those people, talking heads that are saying, "Oh, I want him to run," because I believe if he runs, his message is so disconnected with the democratic values right now that he will just be reaffirming that a rich billionaire has no reality in connection with what average people need for Medicare or for other issues. With you know his employees, they did this Starbucks. They did this scholarship thing that they were giving. They were paying for people to go to scholarship. The only reason they did that because they were afraid they were going to unionize. They were paying them so little. And so, so I want them. There are liberals. I guess I'm liberal progressive. I
yeah.
want as many different voices. Even if Hillary decides to run again, I want her to run again so people can say there's some other options.
Well, I think in this 2020 campaign season, I think that's going to be the interesting thing because I think you're going to find what is the soul and direction of the Democrat Party.
That's hard because we're so diverse.
Because it is spread. As my grandma used to say, "You Democrats, man, you're spread out like a week's washing."
And that's
You are
good.
all, but it's a good thing.
Yes.
But I'm interested to see
Yeah.
how that debate goes because you've got people like AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who is to the far left of any. I mean, I had a grandparent who was a Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrat, and he would be appalled by AOC. I mean, just in the political view that she is.
Sure.
So even though my grandfather probably didn't realize that that Social Security is socialism in a form to an extent, but it's gonna. I think this election season is gonna be fun to watch,
It's gonna be
and
dynamite.
healthy.
I'm gonna cryogenically freeze my body for 2 years. And just somebody plug me back in 2021.
Mark, I want you to comment on what you think about 2020. Well, first of all, let's not forget 2019 is also an election year. We've got city council
Volleyball.
races.
Yeah.
That's right.
We've got party chair and precinct elections that are just as important. Whoever's your precinct party chair is going to be, who your county party chair is going to be. Those are very important roles that shape things within your own party. Do you have something you want to talk about as our female voice of the on the
Female
table?
voice of reason.
I was trying to say of reason.
Yes.
About the 2020 race.
Yes.
I'm super excited, to be honest, because, I am there as much as the candidates are there. So I can't wait. I can't wait to see everybody who is going to announce that they're going to run, and I can't wait to hear their speeches. And so I absolutely love all of this. I'm immersed.
Sure.
I try and do 2 events a day. One of the things that I will, changing the subject a little bit, one of the things that I love about Mark is he's always here with us. Okay? So he makes time for us, and having elected officials in the 2020 race that are like him, that will be with us and spend time with us, whether
That's a good
he
point.
agrees with us or not.
With us meaning at community events,
At community events,
so forth.
I mean, he just accepts us the way we are, and I value that in an elected official. So I hope to
Excellent.
find more elected officials in the 2020 like Mark that are committed to
as
us.
far as
Engaged.
local, and we've talked about this on other shows. I know you and I have talked about this before. One of the really good things about Charlotte politics and Mecklenburg politics and North Carolina politics is even though we're a big city, and we have to admit we're a big city, we still campaign local like a small city.
Well, it's
we
small
still
town.
we
Charlotte's a
still,
small
we still
town.
expect our
Yeah.
candidates and
Yeah.
our elected public servants to be at local events and to do those kind of things. So I really like that because it's still shake your hand, the type of. I know you are a good example. I'm glad you use him. Commissioner Coughlin is that way as well. There's so many
Exactly,
wonderful.
Commissioner Hoffman.
And because we try to be fair and equal, there are people, and we all know it. And every time we say this, who only show up when they're running for office, who only show up at our churches when they're running for office. And we always say, I hope you don't just show up, and we keep electing them. So we gotta give more credit to those who show up, and we gotta start calling out. I'm like, as a Democrat, for example, and Republicans, they run a different way. But as Democrats, we've got to start calling out those, and I know there's a thing about unity or whatever, but my goodness gracious, we wouldn't allow that in the real world of business for you only to show up at your clients when it's time to sign the contract. They would call you out and they would say, where have you been the last year?
Yeah.
You know?
Don't just show up at the stockholders meeting.
Yes.
Be there, engaged.
Yeah, so 2019, 2020, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so 2019 is going to be exciting here locally. You've named all the races. I would just put in the mayoral race. Don't forget about that.
Yes, that's
If
right.
there's
that's
a
right.
challenge,
Yeah.
I do believe we have a mayor that cannot be beat, so it's a futile effort if you try to run against her because she's dynamite. But also in 2020, you got to remember we have the senatorial race here as well.
Yes,
So
yeah, very
us,
important race.
so there'll be a really hotly contested Democratic primary where one of my colleagues actually announced in Trevor Fuller.
And
Yeah.
let's-
He's running for U.S. Senate. You were there, as a matter of fact.
Mark, I've got to say this, and you know, I got to say something controversial every show.
Here it comes.
Looks like I brought it out. Okay.
What I really hope happens, and our party is going through growing pains. Not growing pains, but going through a changing of demographics. We've got more progressive people, the local, like you, and city council levels, and even our DNC person was a very progressive who was elected, Ray McKinnon.
Yes.
We've got, we can see the changes culturally and diversity and so forth changing in our party. And what I noticed here in North Carolina is whenever, and I've said this before, whenever our Democratic Party, they like to have this look of an individual that they like to get behind.
Mm.
And when I ran in 2016, when Deborah Ross announced she was running, the party immediately all got around her. She was our candidate. Chris Ray was running as well.
That's
and there was
right.
another person.
That's right.
I was at many debates, and you would just assume Deborah Ross was the handpicked person. There was not a fairness about getting. So I thought, well, maybe something I don't know about Deborah that it was just great. Linda Coleman was running for lieutenant governor. No attention was given to Linda Coleman when she was, and I was at many campaigns. As a matter of fact, I went to a fundraiser for her in the Cape Fear area, and very few people showed up because Governor Cooper decided to have a fundraiser the exact same night, took all the money away from her. I saw that happen then. I've seen it sometimes happen, not necessarily in Charlotte, but nationally. So when Commissioner Fuller announced, I hope he gets the same backing that people gave Deborah Ross. I don't know what we're waiting for. How do they determine who gets our back? It's interesting when Deborah Ross was running, we need to get behind her. This. When Commissioner Fuller was running, let's see who else is going to enter the race. It's, for me, those things just don't feel right.
Where's your controversial point?
That was my controversial
Oh, okay.
point. My controversial point is...
It wasn't that
I'm
disappointed, Chris.
That's not controversial. I mean, sometimes we have to speak truth to power.
Yes, and I see that, and then our state, not our state, maybe it's our state treasurer or secretary of state, one of the young ladies who just announced this last week, and that she's running again for office, and everyone just, oh, she's our favorite, you know, and so forth. It's, as a party, I know we need to have favorites, but we also have to, I don't know, I just sometimes...
You have to see all points of view and
Yeah.
all sides, but and you see, and that's one of the things that disappoints me about the Republican Party.
Mhm.
And I am a registered Republican.
It happens with you guys, yeah. Yeah.
But the thing about that is there is just that sort of lack of even though we had 17 candidates in the presidential election. That's another show.
They were all looking for talk
altogether.
shows.
But however, but one of the things that I'm interested to see, especially on the national level, you're
Yeah.
talking about this on the state and local level with the Democrat Party, is in 2020, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out and who is going to get that, is going to be that kind of handpicked favorite out of all, because there's such a, a diverse range of candidates with such diverse viewpoints, and but like you say, I think that's healthy. I think, and that's where we get, just like this is healthy.
Yeah.
And this is what I love about coming here and being with you guys, is the fact that we can, disagreements aside, we can at least talk about.
Well, we wait till you leave.
So that's why I'm always the first one to leave here. I mean, what the heck?
So we're running short on time, and I just want to talk about. Does anybody want to say anything about what Tom Brokaw said this weekend about the Latinx community? As a Latinx person, I can tell you that there was a part of me that thought he doesn't really know what he's talking about. We've been assimilating our entire. We've always had to have one foot in our culture and one foot in. So to say that we need to assimilate more or whatever, and I don't want to knock him because he's a good reporter and whatever, and I don't know his heart or whatever, but I think it was an example of, and you and I have talked about some generational type of things that people say.
Well,
I'd like to almost tell Tom Brokaw, my family was in Texas before Texas was Texas and America was America. So if anyone should be assimilating, they should be assimilating to our culture in Mexico or in California or whatever. And so I'm surprised he was not as educated on what we tried to do. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I think basically, and this, all I have to say about that is, like, I think you're talking about generational.
Yeah.
I think when you get older, you tend to just like say what you think without thinking. In other words, I'll put it this way: I would hate to be in a room and see a conversation between Rudy Giuliani and Tom Brokaw, because what the heck would those two guys say to one another? Because and I think it's kind of with the aging thing. It's like, well, I can say this, and you don't even think about what you're saying.
Do you have anything to say about it? Or
No, I was just thinking. I once was in a restaurant and Tom Brokaw was sitting right next to me a long time ago in Berkeley. I just remember that I ran into him a long time ago.
Culture. I keep telling
well,
you.
no, it's because he had I guess he had a kid in Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
And so we were at just Chez Panisse, one of the 2 times I went to Chez Panisse in my life. But he was sitting there, so I remember him.
1 degree of separation.
There you go. There you go. I never fail to mention my celebrity side.
Exactly.
So if you ever want,
Do you know the Kardashians?
no.
Oh well, thank goodness. So you're allowed on the show. So. Mr. Terrell.
No, I when you think about those comments, I think they were completely tone deaf. But I think it's a reflection of what he really believes.
I do too.
And I don't think that just came about yesterday, Sunday.
Yeah.
I think that's, is in his core. The Tom Brokaw that we saw in front of the camera as a nightly anchor, there was a different Tom Brokaw at home. Yeah. And I think that we, as a community culture, people have to stop being surprised by this, by these kinds of statements.
Yep.
We read the Constitution. These laws were written by men who were overt racists in the vast, overwhelming majority of those cases. And so they held similar and the same views as many people as hold today.
Sure.
And I think that's just important for us to remember when we implemented certain things that were not to benefit people that did not look like them.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not trying to make the leap that Tom Brokaw is an overt racist. But
And you're certainly
again,
not saying that the First Amendment, for example, has racist overtones.
Well, I'm saying.
Or the second.
What are you saying?
Or the Constitution, since it was written by racists.
Or the structure
No,
of
I'm
government
saying
itself.
that our founders, our founders were certainly men who did not believe, when they say that all men are created equal. What were they really talking about?
Well, that's different.
Well, that's different from the Constitution, but what I am saying is if you look at what we were founded on, our founding principles, who were they talking about? Who were they trying to protect? And what was it founded on?
So you're saying that the First Amendment doesn't apply to African Americans, or it did not over a period of time?
Over a period, okay, so we could make the leap to say, yes, certain elements apply to African Americans over a period of time. And I think that's an extremely important distinction when we look at the words that are written in our Constitution or any subsequent amendments that have come from that. And I think we have to be very, very clear how those amendments came about and how other people were incorporated and implemented into this document.
Okay, so then what about the structure of government itself, the system of checks and balances? Do you think that has racial overtones?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. There's
the-
no question about it. Tell me how, go ahead, I'm
No,
sorry.
I think we have just witnessed a great town hall meeting that needs to happen.
And we didn't even get to housing. We didn't get-
And we didn't get to housing.
we didn't get to the
But I think it's
federal housing.
important, and
Sure.
I'm kind of taken aback a little bit that because it appears, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you don't believe that. You're saying because there are checks and balances there that it's not a system that's been built on racism, which I would vehemently disagree with. Our whole system of government at the federal, state, and local levels are completely built on racism.
I disagree with that.
Yeah, well, we can agree to disagree respectfully.
But Mark, Commissioner, this is exactly the type of conversations that we need to have as a community.
Yeah.
Because Jeff is a libertarian politically, socially. I would consider probably very progressive socially, even though we disagree on many policy statements and so forth like that. But like Tom Brokaw, I think the reason they're surprised, people just assume Tom Brokaw was this liberal, social, this.
Yeah.
When we, those of us who that he was an ally, hear him say something like that, we go, my God, they're even in our own camp. I've got people in my family, and I've talked about this before, that voted for Ted Cruz. My mom voted for Ted Cruz. Why?
Oh my goodness,
Because
he's a Latina.
you know, and so I'm not saying that, Mom, I love you. I'm just saying is that there are people in our own family that we have to have these conversations with and educate each other about how we see things and whatever. And what I don't see happening right now in Charlotte, whether it's through, believe it or not, even, and maybe you can speak to this as well, and I haven't gotten to you, but like when I go to these events like we went to Monday night, when I go to like a Mick Ministries event, or when I go to some other events or whatever, people are speaking to the choir all the time. I always see the same people there. They're not speaking to the people that
who need to hear the message.
To hear this conversation.
It's like a panel.
Yeah, you're speaking to the choir. We're not. We don't always have panelists up there that are from your point of view or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the audience could be able to hear those, because there is a reason. And like you and I had this conversation about like my dad, who the gentleman who was the moderator on Monday night talked about it in African American communities. We've always been told there's the man.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We're taught the same thing.
Right.
When he said that, I was like, and that's why I was so excited, because I grew up going, you know, the man. My dad used to always say, the man always wants our taxes. The man's always doing this, and the man. I was like, who's the man? Now we didn't call him Charlie, Uncle Charlie. Is that what
Mr. Charlie.
Mr. Charlie. We just called him the man.
Yeah.
So when President Obama got elected, I was in bliss, because I was like, oh my God, he is the new man.
He's the man.
And I thought, these crazy people are going to go crazy. And they did go crazy.
Yeah.
They did go crazy. The man was not, it suddenly became those same people that I thought were the man were now going, the man Obama's trying to keep us down. And I was like, well, good.
The man was born in Kenya.
Exactly. So anyway, I got to let her speak because we're running. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
To your point, really quickly, when Mark brought that up, Mr. Charlie is a Grateful Dead. There's a Grateful Dead song
Oh, is
called Mr. Charlie.
Is that right?
Listen to it because it's like basically
Sure.
sums it up. Mr.
Yeah.
Charlie told me so. So you should believe it because Mr.
Mr.
Charlie
Charlie
told me
said
so.
so, right.
It's like when my mom and dad used to say, "Well, that's what they say," and I'm like, "Who are they?" So
All right. Well, we've had a good conversation here, and I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, we have to respect everyone people's time and y'all's time as well. I know y'all got busy days, and you probably got 8 events to go to.
That's right.
tonight or whatever. But hey, if you guys want to have that town hall meeting,
That's a good idea.
can you arrange that? God, if just her followers on social media went, we fill the place up.
I would love it.
I want to thank everyone. I also, once again, I want to thank Haiti for sponsoring our Ponduce. And if you're also interested in sponsoring this show, we've got one a week every Wednesday from 10:30 to 11. And I want to thank you so much for taking time out of
Thanks
your
for
busy
having
time
me.
period. Thank you, Jeff, for coming back as well, the man about
Always a
town.
pleasure.
Thank you, Fudd, for coming out here. Thank you, Ms. Tara. Sorry we didn't. Do you have anything else you want to add that
No, I
maybe
just-
we missed? Or
I really appreciate everybody that came to do this, and it means a lot to me that you guys would be involved and take time out of your day to do this.
well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Well, thank you for saying that. We do miss Ruth Perez, who is one of our regulars. She actually is doing an event with the city of Charlotte. She's on the international one of the committees or something with the city of Charlotte, and they're having some event today that lasts about 4 or 5 hours. Mr. Tony Foreman, we miss you. My our friend,
my brother.
yes,
My brother.
No,
So we're brothers then.
we want to thank him and Fudd. We hope we can get you to return and bring your conservative friends on here. We need more
Well,
conversations.
actually,
We don't-
and I'm going to make it a point to reach out. And being a musician and
Sure.
being in the musician community, there aren't very many conservatives in
That
that
is-
line of work,
Sure.
and so therefore that's why I want to reach out to these people and get them on the Facebook feed and on the YouTube feed
Sure.
because they might actually realize, wow, Fudd's human. Even though he is conservative, he's still a human, and he has some friends who are progressive, and they can actually talk about things. So
When
that's
I know people, I've said this probably to people and what else, but you know, when Fudd and I first met, you know, he's a musician, he plays. Well, Fudd, what are you playing
I'm
next?
playing at the Lodge here in Old Providence at
Oh, the Okie-
the intersection of Colony and
Colony.
Ray Road, Saturday night. 8
Got to come
o'clock.
out.
Yeah,
Great,
please come
great
out.
musician.
It'll be fun. We,
it's
we
really,
always
really
have a good time.
When Fudd and I first met, because he's a musician and great, he's wonderful. Doesn't play enough Lady Gaga, I think, but that's probably a good thing for him. I just assumed he was, because I had started, I think I was thinking about running for office at the time, and I was like, you know, we could talk, and he started talking about, at that time, President Obama was president, and so forth, and I was going, I think he's, and I was like, am I hearing this right?
Conservative musician.
But then we became, you know, we started talking, and many things that we were reaching just different paths. So I appreciated our conversations. I wish we had more of those kind of conversations.
And we always do. And I wish people in general could have the kind of conversations that we have here and be open with one another and be truly honest. And I think we would get more accomplished.
Our director is going to kill me, and I want to say that I want to thank you, Commissioner Jarrell, and I hope that any candidate that's running in 2019 or 2020, that you see that this is important for you to do, to attend candidate forums, to understand what people's, because I do believe that as voters and neighbors, we deserve to have people who are involved in our community and who don't just show up whenever they're running for office. And I do hope that those voters start to call them out. If you go to a candidate forum or if you go to a fundraiser, ask that candidate, where are you going to be next week? And I think it's important not just to have them stand up and give a 20-minute, 3-minute. They usually only give us 3 minutes, and people clap and they walk off. We need to have more of these kind of conversations and more of those, because this is an elected official, a public servant, is a very serious responsibility. make decisions for our county that impact all of us.
$1
You
million.
got uptown?
$1
I
million.
know! I'm like
Shocked.
really excited. I'm like,
That's right.
now we can actually.
It's because he
Michael
shows up.
Jordan is one of their constituents.
Exactly.
His whole organization,
Exactly.
along with the whole Panthers
Well,
organization.
exactly.
I'm just going to say real quickly, I know you always do this to me every single time show. I want to congratulate Congressperson Alma Adams
Yes.
for her swearing-in ceremony this Sunday. And I've always been a fan of hers and what she does for our city. And I've said this before. When I ran in 2016, everyone was talking about Robert Pittenger, Robert Pittenger, Robert Pittenger. Alma Adams is the congressperson of the majority of Charlotte.
That's right.
So I always got so upset when the media, whenever something going on in Charlotte, and the first person they wanted to talk to was Pittenger. He only represented, and the 9th District is only a South Charlotte.
Sliver.
But the majority of Charlotte is Congresswoman. She represents the banking. She represents almost the airport. She represents all of those areas.
That's right.
And I do wish that our Charlotte media and our citizens of Charlotte would give as much respect and attention. She is our only voice that we have in Washington without having someone seated in the 9th, and we didn't even talk about the 9th today. Is that good?
No news.
She is our only voice that's fighting for, and she's always endlessly fighting for our district. So
Yes.
I hope if you're a donor, donate to her just as
Right.
much as people donated to people running in the 9th.
That's right.
And if you're an elected official who endorse just as much Alma Adams as well, because she is truly a shero of mine.
Yes.
And I don't have as many hats as she does. I never will have as many hats as she does, and no one will ever look better in a hat besides
That's
probably
true.
Tony in a hat. So
Her back, she was an art teacher, art professor, right?
she was a teacher,
She was a
educator, professor,
Yes.
Yeah,
and then she was in our General Assembly.
Yes.
She had
But
truly
She was a professor of
qualified
art,
life
and
experiences.
I'm sort of interested in
Yeah.
having a conversation with her.
Yeah,
about
'cause you
that.
are cultured.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well, I'm it's an
cultured.
interesting background.
cultured for me is Netflix, Hulu, and so forth. Anybody else before because we're going to get shut off here. Once again, thank you everybody. Thank you for our sponsorship. Thank you for being here. This is a great conversation. Please don't forget to give our sponsor a call, 704-819-8689 Hot Blue, or if you want to sponsor in another way, our show, call 980-477-1513. Thank you and salute. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully we'll get some, we'll get some, I don't know if anybody wants snow. I really want snow. All right, everyone.
It's cold.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
All right, now we eat.